politician. So Michael Howard is clearly leaving himself an escape hatch, and I think if one comes, I think he'd be quite happy to climb up it.
Polly, very quickly, one-word answer. The mood of the public at large, aren't they basically going to back Blair on this and say, look, who cares about a few people being locked up if it makes us secure?
I'm afraid so, and that's why all politicians always go for the authoritarian option. Pure populism, pretty disgraceful.
Well, we must move on from terror to tax. At last, after many months of waiting, the Tories have unveiled their first promised tax cut, a 50% rebate on the council tax for the over 65s. But will it be enough to win over the grey vote? And what will Labour do to match it?
7 and 6, 76.
And your starter for one, what connects these voters being so assiduously courted by the party leaders recently? An estimated 7 in 10 of British pensioners voted at the last election, rather more than younger groups. Politicians can do the sums, pensioners matter. And they've been particularly hard hit by rises in the council tax. And today the Tories announced they'd spend the first third of the £4 billion they've promised for tax cuts to help pensioners with it.
Those who've given so much must surely be given their due. The older generation have been airbrushed out of Mr. Blair's Britain, but I will stand up for them.
Households in which all adults are over 65 would get 50% off their council tax, up to a maximum of £500. Price, £1.3 billion. Rises in council tax have been a major political issue, and nobody thinks the current system is really fair.
We have plans to change it. The council tax came from Mr. Howard's poll tax. They introduced it, and there are a number of great difficulties with it. That's why I set up an inquiry under the Rainsford, one of my ministers, to look at the balance of contribution between national government and local government.
Other parties, however, would ditch the council tax completely and replace it with a new local income tax.
Michael Howard's plans are rather a desperate attempt to apply sticking plaster to a system that is fundamentally unfair because it's completely unrelated to people's ability to pay. It will not reach millions of people on low and moderate income, including many pensioners.
The SNP wants to get rid of council tax completely. It's an unfair and regressive tax and it hits pensioners hardest. We want to abolish it and replace it with a local income tax which is based on ability to pay.
So, Polly, have the government had a bit of their wind taken out of their sails and the Tories stolen a march on them with this?
Well, everybody's going to be after the pensioner vote. I don't think this is going to stand up to much scrutiny at all, because what it actually does is it delivers another £9 a week to the top 10th of pensioners, the very richest, who are very well off indeed these days. Nothing at all to the bottom, I think the bottom 20%. The middle lot, the exact halfway, get an extra £5 a week. It is a far more unjust system even than the council tax system we've got at the moment. And I think that the truth is that actually when that comes out, pensioners themselves are quite fair-minded and they themselves care quite a bit about the poorer pensioners, and I think they're going to feel uncomfortable about it. I don't think they're going to just trouser the money and be pleased.
So, George, not enough for poor pensioners?
Well, I mean, Polly is right on that point of view, though I think the very poor pensioners don't pay council tax at all anyway because they get benefits. So, yes, it does help further up, but I think there are a lot of people in that middle who are very upset about the level of council tax increases, and I think they will welcome that. The charities for the elderly, Age Concern, have welcomed this. I mean, they say that at last politicians, even Michael Howard, they say, are beginning to address the concerns of the elderly, a group who really do feel that they have been ignored and neglected. I think it is I mean, whether it could have been a better policy, but I think it is directed at a group of voters who feel aggrieved, and I think
the
its
rich
headlines,
ones, the rich ones.
They're not. I don't think a lot of pensioners.
£9 a week for the richest pensioners, you know, for all the lords and all the rest of them.
But there are lots, but that happens with child benefit or any of these universal benefits. You know, I don't think that is an argument. It's simple to do. Otherwise, you get wrapped up in means testing.
Andrew, isn't there a risk that this just reminds the voters of the poll tax?
Potentially, yes. With Howard, obviously, as Prescott pointed out, you know, poll tax led to the council tax, and this is it. But I think, it was over, 15 years ago, and I think people are, as George points out, it's not a particularly subtle policy, this, but it is a policy aimed at a specific group of people. And I think that politics is quite interesting. They got quite a good hit on this, the Tories, on sort of Monday, Tuesday this week. And there's certain murmurings from the Labour sort of side that actually the sort of famed rebuttal unit which we've seen in 97 and 2001 just wasn't there this time, and Milburn was very slow to come out and attack the policy.
So what do you think the government's going to do to respond? Are they going to wait until the budget?
Yeah, they basically think that the Tories, particularly looking at the polls, have actually, you know, fired a lot of their bullets already, including this one. They brought them forward.
Yeah.
It wasn't expected for them to do this before the budget, this council tax move. And what Labour people are saying, wait to the budget, that's when you'll see what we're going to do. And remains to be seen whether they'll steal any of Howard's clothes on this one.
Will they have enough money for it? I mean, because a lot of people say, look, you know, the Chancellor's budget, his purse is tight at the moment. If they simply come up with something like, you know, to help the take-up of council tax benefit, which is a great benefit that people don't take at the moment, if it is limited to that, and that's money that's already allotted, so it doesn't worry Gordon at all, will that be enough, or does Gordon George have to find a decent sweetener here?
I think he's got to find some sweetness. He's a very political chancellor, and of course he knows if he can produce a budget which helps them to win a third term, that in a way helps him with his ultimate ambition of succeeding Tony Blair in Downing Street. The most recent economic figures suggest that the tax revenues are coming in stronger than people expected, and I think Gordon Brown he's very good at spreading around small amounts of money and making them sound like the most generous things that any chancellor has done. And I'm sure he's going to tackle things like council tax. I think he's going to tackle stamp duty or something like that for first-time home buyers. He will want to trump the Tories, and also...
Hang on, just a minute, a small amount of money. He's given more to the pensioners than anybody else has given. The minimum amount a pensioner now gets is £102 a week. That is way above anything they got before under previous... You know, there really has been a lot of money put to the poorer pensioners, and now you find it's the middle and the higher pensioners who are complaining, but actually it's the poorest that matter most.
What about this grey vote that everybody's going for? I mean, we know that they do turn out to vote, but they also, isn't it true that they don't actually change their vote that much? So will any of these policies make much difference?
I think they do. I mean, the grey vote, it's quite clear. I think they are a collection of voters who feel that they have been neglected. I mean, Tony Blair always used to go on about this young country, didn't he, and having pop stars and people into number 10 Downing Street. I think those grey voters are going to be looking closely and looking at what the parties do for them. And in the end, when people come down to vote, a lot of it is about what is in it for me.
Not for the pensioners. Interestingly, they tend to be the most unself-interested lot. They tend to be the ones who vote most, whichever party they vote for a sense of what's going to be better for the country, and they're worried about their children and their grandchildren too. I think they're one of the less selfish groups if you look at them traditionally, and so I don't think bribery washes with them.
Well, we must leave money matters and I'm afraid move on to matrimony. For years, it's been an ancient convention. Ministers never reveal the advice they give the Queen. Well, not anymore. This week, the government explained in detail why it believes the Prince of Wales and Camilla Parker Bowles can get married in a civil ceremony. But has the government got it right, and why does it matter?
Side by side on official business, the Prince of Wales and the soon-to-be Duchess of Cornwall, presiding together at a reception at Clarence House, reassured that when they marry, regardless of who attends, at least the ceremony will be lawful. Up to now, as the Queen's sister, Princess Margaret, discovered in the 1950s, members of the royal family were not permitted to marry in civil ceremonies. Times, or at least the advice of the government's law officers, change. The Lord Chancellor, Lord Falconer, is the lawyer who's had to advise the Queen on her eldest son's marriage. In a statement, Lord Falconer said, "The government is satisfied that it is lawful for the Prince of Wales and Mrs. Parker Bowles, like anyone else, to marry by a civil ceremony." Then, in a reference to the advice given 50 years ago, he said, "We are aware that different views have been taken in the past, but we consider that these were overcautious." But some lawyers say the Lord Chancellor's statement is not sufficient.
That, to my mind, is not good enough basis for Prince Charles's wedding. It shouldn't be a matter of choosing between one body of legal opinion and another body of legal opinion. It should be clear-cut.
Aside from whether the marriage will be lawful, there's the question of who is going to be there. Prince Charles is said to fully understand his mother's decision not to attend the civil ceremony. Over at Buckingham Palace, Mother seemed to be having no second thoughts about her decision, though she is said to be looking forward to joining the newlyweds later.
So, Andrew, a bit of a royal mix-up here. Who's to blame? Is it the government or is it the palace?
I think for once, James, I don't think you can blame Number 10, much as we like to sort of blame them for these...
It's their advice, isn't it?
Well, it looks like sort of Lord Faulkner has got them out of a hole on this, and incredibly, if you wanted to look at the political sort of angle to this, the way he just threw in at the end of his advice this week that it was the European human rights legislation that helped really tip it over the edge, and definitely it would be legal, bearing in mind that Charles was very dismissive when that came in 4 or 5 years ago. I think Number 10 are just rowing furiously away from this story and letting Charles and his advisors get on with the sorry mess.
Well, let's have a look at that. I mean, in 1997, you know, this government was effectively a mouthpiece for Buckingham Palace. Frequently throughout, you know, the death of the Princess of Wales and other times, you know, Number 10 was in the driving seat, George. And now it's having a brief, curt statement when the marriage is announced, and that's it. And we're having nothing to do with it.
But then it thought it was leading public opinion. Tony Blair, didn't he coin the soundbite, the People's Princess,
Remember it well.
on the day after Diana died in that crash. But I think Tony Blair looks at this and thinks, this wedding will divide the country. I mean, there's no doubt. I mean, I personally think they should have got married a long time ago, but I think that's probably a minority opinion. And Tony Blair doesn't like to be associated with anything which may be unpopular. And I disagree with Andrew. I mean, I think the government could have done far more to help the future king sort this out. I think they have been left largely to do it themselves. They've made rather a mess of it, and I think the government could have done far more and enabled this to be a much more sort of, I don't know, serious and organised occasion. It's been a mess, which I think reflects badly on the monarchy, badly on the government, and probably badly on the country as a whole.
Polly, why does this matter?
Well, that's a very good question. I mean, you're assuming that it does. The extraordinary thing about this is that the one thing, when everything is always at its worst, the one thing everybody says is, well, there's a fine thing the royal family was doing. They're so good at the pomp and circumstance. And you go, oh, yes, aren't they wonderful at the ceremonies? What a complete mess up. The other thing they always say is, well, of course, you know, Her Majesty herself always stays above the fray. She always has behaved through all her family's trouble absolutely impeccably. This week she has behaved appallingly. I mean, to announce that she's not going to go to the heir to the throne, her son's wedding, out of some fit of pique, and what's more, none of her other children are going to be allowed to go too, is quite shocking, and has really, I think, you know, dented her reputation quite badly. I don't think it's anything to do with the government. It's none of the government's business, but they seem to be making a mess of it.
Hang on a minute. The government has a constitutional role. The Prime Minister, under legislation, is required to give advice to the Queen on whether it is legally appropriate for her son to marry a specific individual. This is not Lord Chancellor's advice. This is the Prime Minister's advice.
Well, the Prime Minister advised by his lawyers, his legal officers, and they've said yes, and so he said yes, and quite sensible. I wish they'd eloped to Gretna Green and done it quietly.
I think there is a political point here, though, going back to George's point about why they didn't get involved, and there's they're very sort of touchy about, if you remember over the Queen Mother's funeral, there was this suggestion that Tony Blair was trying to muscle in on that. And it wouldn't have taken much for those stories to resurface about Blair trying to muscle in on this wedding, which from day one has always been a sort of private sort of affair.
I mean, I agree with much of what Polly says, and I do think, you know, the Queen. This is a bizarre decision not to go to sort of quote protocol, and I mean, in a way, she has managed, I think, to heighten up the naffness of having this wedding in the Guildhall in Windsor. I mean, in a way, I thought made it even worse for Charles and for the monarchy. And it's one of those things which a little bit of common sense on everybody's part could have been sorted out. But in the end, I think the still thing is that after that wedding is April 8th, I mean, Camilla will have achieved that remarkable thing. She will have married Charles, and I think she will one day be the Queen of England.
Yeah.
And whatever the fuss now over the wedding, I think that's going to be the story after April the 8th.
Very quickly, is the Prime Minister going to go to this great event, even if the Queen isn't?
You mean, would we advise him to or not? I think it's a very tricky one to call. If the Queen, I think it's probably, you know, if the Queen doesn't go, perhaps he shouldn't go. If he goes, then all the other political parties have got to go. And how many of them, during an election period, do we have to have every single party just on the paper? Monster raving loonies, UKIP and the rest? I don't know. And will they want them? Who knows? It's an appalling mess, the whole thing. Could have become the people's wedding ceremony. It could have become the people's event in the Windsor Guildhall. What
Let's
a
leave it there, I'm
mistake.
afraid. That's all we've got time for this week. My thanks to Andrew Porter of the Sunday Times, Polly Toynbee of The Guardian, and George Jones of the Daily Telegraph. More Straight Talk next week, but for now, goodbye.
Hello there. Well, it's not what it's spring-like, is it? It's cold and grey for many of us, but at least what's coming out of the sky at the moment is mostly rain rather than snow. Rather drab, dreary afternoon across many parts of England and Wales. Some showery bursts of rain here, you'll notice. Best of the brightness out west, but the really cold air is not very far away. In fact, it's beginning to come back across the North Sea. Just watch how these arrows turn blue across southeastern parts of England overnight. A cutting wind coming in from the northeast, and by dawn we will see some sleet and snow showers drifting in across the Thames estuary into parts of Kent, some drifting in across the Midlands, around the Wash, northeastern parts of England prone to a dusting of snow as well. By tomorrow morning, it's going to be a cold and frosty night eventually. By dawn, temperatures at or below freezing in many places. So a rather icy start, a rather cloudy one across eastern parts of England. Still some flurries of sleet or snow around, the potential for a temporary covering of snow. Best of the brightness out west, and that's the way it'll stay through the afternoon. A cold, cold wind in the southeast, temperatures here barely above freezing. Best out west in the brightness, around 5 or 6 degrees.
This could be any British street on which any of us might choose to walk. But when a crossroads is reached, what is the best direction to take if you can't see what's around the corner? Britain's Streets of Vice, Sex in the City, Monday at 9:15 on BBC One.
This week in Talking Movies, a special preview of the Oscars, a refashioned Oscar ceremony. Will Martin Scorsese finally win? Or will Dirty Harry deliver a knockout punch?
A man is arrested in Belfast in connection with the murder of Robert McCartney. Last night, the IRA expelled 3 of its members for their suspected involvement. Testing a fragile truce. 7 people are being questioned in connection with a suicide bomb in Tel Aviv. The Pope will take part in the traditional Sunday blessing, but his message will be given by an aide. Towering inferno, a fire rages through a 25-story building in the Taiwanese city of Taichung. In the Six Nations, an easy chance for Patterson leaves Scotland in the lead over Italy at Murrayfield. Hello, good afternoon. You're watching BBC News 24. A man has been arrested in connection with the murder of the Belfast man Robert McCartney. The family of Mr. McCartney had called for all those who were present when he was murdered in a Belfast city centre bar to come forward. Last night, the IRA expelled 3 men in connection with the killing.
Robert McCartney's relatives faced reporters in Belfast today welcoming the decision of the IRA to expel 3 members suspected of being involved in Mr. McCartney's murder. But the family said more witnesses still need to come forward.
We believe that between 12 and 20 people were involved in the offence of that night. Not all of them, we understand, were all IRA members, but we want all people to be encouraged or persuaded or to hand themselves in. They are the key vital witnesses to Robert's murder and the cover-up.
Robert McCartney was beaten and stabbed outside a Belfast city centre bar on January the 30th. His murder horrified the Republican community, and the IRA and Sinn Féin have been under intense pressure over their handling of the incident. Sinn Féin leader Gerry Adams said today that if he'd witnessed Mr. McCartney's murder, he'd have come forward to give evidence to a solicitor. Sinn Féin doesn't encourage cooperation with Northern Ireland's police service. Today, detectives in Belfast investigating the murder said they'd arrested a man after he and his solicitor went to a police station in the city. Bernard Smith, BBC News.
We're live now to Belfast and our Ireland correspondent Mark Simpson. Mark, can you put any more flesh on these bones?
I think what the IRA had hoped would happen today would have been that the family of Robert McCartney would have read their statement from last night and said, thank you very much indeed. Well, that just settles everything for it. You've expelled 3 members. Thank you very much. That didn't happen today. This family, this Catholic family living in a strongly Republican area, have showed remarkable courage, remarkable dignity. I think most people would agree as well over recent weeks. And I think what they're showing today is resilience. They're refusing to take no for an answer from the IRA. They are convinced that more than 3 people were involved, more than 3 people within the IRA killed their brother, and those 4 sisters, which we've just seen in that report, are refusing to let up. They're keeping the pressure on the IRA today.
Yeah, the IRA said that they'd expelled 3 members and had advised them all in the strongest terms possible to take responsibility for their actions. Do you think we can expect 2 more arrests in the near future? Because not many people put 2 fingers up at the IRA if they're advised in strong terms by the IRA to do something.
You're absolutely right, Peter, and yes, one could read into that IRA statement last night a threat against these 3 men that they have expelled, that if they don't hand themselves in as such, well then the IRA will deal with them, and we all know what that means. We know nothing about the identity of the person who handed himself or herself into a Belfast police station earlier on today. All we're told by the police is that a man presented himself at a Belfast police station accompanied by a solicitor. I was with the McCartney family when this news broke. They were very, very excited by this news, but I think they know, as everyone else knows here in Belfast, there have been arrests before, but there haven't been any charges yet, so it's a case of wait and see.
Mark Simpson in Belfast. A suicide bombing in the Israeli city of Tel Aviv last night has put the Middle East peace process under renewed pressure. At least 4 people died in the blast. The Palestinian Authority called the attack sabotage and vowed to pursue those behind it. Matthew Price sends us this report.
On the Tel Aviv seafront this morning, little sign of the panic that tore through here on Friday night. Just investigators looking for evidence. Hours earlier, it was very different. Israelis had been feeling safer on their streets of late. No longer.
It sends a very clear message to the Palestinian Authority that while they've taken some steps to curb terrorism, to stop, they haven't taken sufficient steps, I would say, to really dismantle the terrorist organizations.
And the Palestinian leadership condemned the attack. Mahmoud Abbas told reporters that external parties are trying to sabotage the peace process and to harm the Palestinian cause. We will hunt these people, he said, and bring them to justice. Today at the home of the suspected bomber, Israel arrested a number of his relatives. The Palestinian authorities have also made arrests. Both sides believe it's possible the Lebanon-based Islamic group Hezbollah may have been involved. All the Palestinian militant groups have denied involvement in this attack, and there seems to be an acceptance that the current truce will hold. For now, Israel appears willing to give the Palestinian leadership a chance to prove itself. Matthew Price, BBC News, Jerusalem.
And our Middle East correspondent Barbara Plett adds this from Jerusalem.
I think that if this is a one-off, if this was an individual act, then it's potentially not that damaging, because all parties, the Israeli government, the Palestinian Authority, and indeed the Palestinian factions, seem to be signaling that they want the truce to continue. If, however, this is the beginning of a wave of attacks, then it's very damaging.
The militant groups, the terror groups, have been queuing up to disown the act. Is it conceivable that it could have been just one person working alone?
Yes, it is conceivable. It's possible that this particular man had a grudge or wanted to carry out a revenge attack and just went and did it. We have examples in the past of attacks that were carried out by militants who were not sent by any group, but they had their own personal reasons for going. So that is possible. The Palestinian security forces, some of them are saying that they suspect perhaps this man was recruited by the Lebanese Islamic movement, Hezbollah, that he was paid by them to go and carry out the attack in order to sabotage the ceasefire efforts. That is something that Hezbollah has emphatically denied, and that is something that says that it believes this is incitement against it by Israel itself. Of course, it's referring to a campaign by Israel to get Hezbollah named a terrorist organization by the EU. So there are different reasons maybe for pointing to Hezbollah, but that is one thing the Palestinian security forces have said.
Does the response of the Palestinians measure up to Israeli expectations?
Well, the Israelis have taken this opportunity to say that they want there to be tougher action from the Palestinians, that they don't think that Mr. Abbas's strategy of negotiating a ceasefire with the Palestinian factions is good enough, that he has to go after them and disarm them. Up until now, Mr. Abbas has said that he simply isn't going to do that. It just doesn't work in terms of the internal balance of power. He has shown in Gaza that he's been able to keep things quiet there. He's deployed troops there. The factions, all the main factions have held to the truce. He doesn't really have control in the West Bank. The Israelis are occupying the cities and the villages. They were talking about handing over those cities to Palestinian control. But in the West Bank, he doesn't have the freedom that he has in Gaza. So there is, of course, criticism, and they're saying we need him to act, not just talk. But at the same time, I think there probably is a recognition that he is doing what he can.
Barbara Platt in Jerusalem. And digital viewers can see more reports and reaction to the suicide bomb attack in Tel Aviv by pressing the red button, going interactive, selecting News Multiscreen. Helicopters have been used to rescue people trapped by a fire on the 18th floor of a skyscraper in the Taiwanese city of Taichung. Firefighters battled the flames, which started at the Golden Plaza building, which houses shops and schools.
Panic on the streets of Taichung, Taiwan's third largest city, as debris rains down from above. One of the city's most famous landmarks was in flames, the Golden Plaza Tower, shops and schools inside. At one point, students and shoppers were trapped, others forced to flee for their lives.
The fire came very quick while we were working on the 12th floor. Luckily, all my colleagues were able to come down to the ground safely.
Helicopters arrived to try to rescue those stranded on top of the tower. At least 9 people were airlifted to safety, officials say. Investigations are now underway into the cause of the fire, thought to have started on the 18th floor in a disco. It was closed at the time. And so far, officials say it's not clear what started the blaze. Chris Hogg, BBC News.
And earlier, Chris told us some of the details of one of the victims.
One of them is the body of a 40-year-old security guard who was working in the building. The other one is so far unidentified. And in a way, when you look at those pictures, it's remarkable that if the body count is indeed that low, that so many people managed to survive this. This was a building that contains not just shops, but also schools where students go to cram for their exams. And so on a Saturday, it would have been full of people. And you could just see the terror on those people's faces as they tried to flee. They were forced to flee for their lives.
We all know what happened with the Twin Towers in New York. Is anyone talking about the possibility here of collapse?
No, there's no discussion of that yet. I think we're still in the very early stages. Now, those pictures that you're looking at are daylight pictures. It's night, of course, now in Taiwan, and the investigation is still underway, but it's still in its very early stages. Still no news from the fire authorities as to what might have caused this in this building, which is a dominant landmark in this city of Taichung. It's in the middle of the city. It's the place which was renowned for having the best view across the city. And but as I say, the investigation going on at the moment, not only into the cause of this fire, but also into whether or not the structure needs to be made safe.
Chris Hogg. The Pope will play a part in the traditional Angelus blessing tomorrow, but is not expected to make an appearance. The Vatican says one of the Pope's aides will read his words and bless the crowd in St. Peter's Square on the Pope's behalf. The 84-year-old pontiff is now said to be breathing without help, but his doctors at Rome's Gemelli Hospital say he won't be able to speak for several days. A fresh statement about his condition is expected on Monday. Our correspondent Philippa Thomas is at the Gemelli Hospital. She says the Pope will play only a minimal role in Sunday's blessing.
Well, the statement, Peter, that they put out today from the Vatican, I'll show you the bulletin. You can see it's a single piece of paper, it's very brief, and all it says about the Pope's participation is the Holy Father will join in the recital of the Angelus prayer from his bed at the Gemelli Hospital. Now, I think we have to be quite cautious about this because that could, in fact, mean something quite passive. It could mean, in effect, that he simply watches the television from his hospital bed and he's spiritually communing. He's taking part in the prayers mentally. It could mean something more, and the last time he was here, he did appear at the window and indicate that he was blessing the crowd and utter a few words, but we're being led to believe that that won't happen. So really, it would have been more of a news story in a way if they'd said the Pope is not taking part, because that would have indicated that the Pope was perhaps not conscious or certainly didn't have his mental faculties.
Philippa Thomas in Rome. The main British tsunami appeal fund closes today, 2 months after the disaster which devastated Southeast Asia. People in Britain have donated an unprecedented £300 million to the appeal.
The last day of the appeal at the Disasters Emergency Committee, or DEC. At midnight tonight, the phone lines will close after 2 months of fundraising for the tsunami region. It's been their most successful appeal ever. The sum of money raised on an unprecedented scale, thanks to the immense public generosity.
We felt it was right to say, look, we think you have done what is appropriate. Let's close the fund, let's move on, let's make sure that other parts of the world also get support. We think this is the sort of size fund that will make a real difference.
So just how much money has this emergency committee raised? Well, £300 million, and a further £50 million has been raised by other British charities. But it's still a long way off the £6.65 billion that the UN estimates is needed. The government's promised to donate £75 million, although it says it's actually given much more by supplying resources for the aid effort. But for the DEC, spending such an unprecedentedly large sum of money will be a real challenge. It says now the initial relief effort is over, it will focus on a long-term programme to rebuild schools, hospitals and businesses in the region. Sophie Hutchinson, BBC News.
Earlier, our correspondent in Banda Aceh, Rachel Harvey, told me all donations have been very much appreciated.
They do realise that this has come from all around the world, and particularly a large amount from Britain as well as from the United States and Australia. Those are the people they seem to have heard of. So yes, there is an awareness and a huge amount of gratitude on the ground here, but of course there was a huge amount of help needed, and it took a while to get to Aceh. It took a while for people to realise how bad the catastrophe was here, but now there's an absolutely huge humanitarian relief operation running now. And most people who do need help are getting the help. At least that's what aid organisations are telling us, that there is a situation now where, yes, people are dependent on aid for the time being, but at least they are getting that help.
Are the aid organisations themselves doing reconstruction work, or are they putting it in the hands of intermediaries, which may, I suppose, slow the thing up?
Well, we're not even at the stage of reconstruction here yet. There's still diggers going through the rubble, trying to clear areas. There are still dead bodies being pulled from that rubble, even now, more than 2 months on. But in some areas that have been cleared, yes, people are beginning to think about how to rebuild and where to rebuild, because some of the areas were so badly damaged that it may not be possible to rebuild on those areas. So at the moment, it's a question of where to rebuild, yes, who will do the rebuilding, and the Indonesian government is very much in charge of this, so anybody who wants to do any reconstruction has to work through them. They're the ones that have got to make the decisions.
Rachel Harvey in Banda Aceh. It's 16 minutes past 3, the headlines. A man has been arrested in connection with the murder of the Belfast man Robert McCartney. 7 people have been arrested in connection with the suicide bomb attack outside a nightclub in Tel Aviv, which killed 4 people and injured around 50. And the Vatican has announced that the Pope will take part in Sunday's traditional blessing, but he will not appear at the window of his hospital room.
In sport, 2 are sent off at St Mary's as Southampton and Arsenal provide the fireworks in the Premiership. A Peter Crouch goal gives Southampton a precious point as Arsenal's defensive problems surface again. Scotland have the advantage over Italy at Murrayfield as both sides look for their first Six Nation win of the year. And Ian Poulter keeps the European flag flying in the match play quarterfinals in California. Full details in an hour's time. See you then.
Sue Thurl, thanks. It's been estimated that 5% of Britons who think they know who their real father is are wrong. Around 20,000 paternity tests are carried out each year, and the process is becoming cheaper and more easily available. A test via the internet, for example, costs around £200. Now, Britain's first walk-in DNA clinic is opening in Liverpool. It says it'll be offering counselling and free consultations. Clarence Mitchell reports.
The former Home Secretary, a man who well knows the anguish faced in many families where there are denials and doubts about the identity of a child's biological father. DNA paternity testing has never had such a high profile. And it's never been so easy. This new clinic in Liverpool is the first in Britain to offer a walk-in paternity testing service. This man has had doubts about whether he's the father of at least one child in his family. He and his partner had been planning to get married. He now wants to take a test.
I think it's brilliant that people out there who are in this situation can finally resolve their problems, and they can build their families properly, and they can live a happier life, and their children will grow happier, and it's all good.
The clinic says they'll be among the first clients when it opens.
When he found out about this clinic, it was easier and more simple. I wasn't willing to do it, but I changed my mind to please him.
But there are serious worries about making testing this easy. It used to be expensive and took weeks to arrange. Now it can be done for less than £200, and the new clinic can give you the result in a matter of hours.
The availability of these tests has to be very carefully considered, and we would counsel anyone before they think about having a test to think about their reasons, to think about the consequences, and to have counselling about the consequences of the tests before they actually have the test done.
No one from the clinic would be interviewed, but they did say there would be an option for counselling. It's estimated there are 3 million Britons who think they know who their father is, but they're wrong. It's getting easier, cheaper and quicker to find out the truth. Clarence Mitchell, BBC News.
The head of the British Army, General Sir Mike Jackson, has apologised to the Iraqi people following the jailing of 3 of his soldiers for abusing civilian prisoners. Lance Corporal Mark Cooley, pictured here with an Iraqi, was yesterday sentenced to 2 years in jail at a court-martial in Germany. Corporal Daniel Kenyon was given 18 months and Lance Corporal Darren Larkin got 5 months, all for the offences at a camp in Basra in May 2003. Other news now briefly. More than 300 people are reported to have died in a district of western Afghanistan during the worst winter for decades. The US military has begun dropping emergency supplies over the district, which has been cut off by snow for more than a month. More snow is predicted before the spring thaw brings the danger of flooding. Egypt's president has outlined plans to allow more than one candidate to stand in his country's presidential elections. Hosni Mubarak told an audience in Cairo he wants Parliament to make legal changes which would allow multi-party elections. Egypt has come under pressure from America to reform its electoral system. Japan has successfully launched a rocket 15 months after its last attempt ended in a huge fireball. The 53-metre H-2A rocket blasted off from a space centre at Tanegashima in southern Japan. All H-2A launches have been put on hold since the last launch, when controllers had to detonate the rocket after a booster failed to detach. The weather is having an impact on today's football fixtures, particularly in Scotland, but in years to come, the occasional cold snap might not make much difference to the fixture list. From next season, UEFA, the European governing body, is to permit the use of artificial playing surfaces during all competitions. In Scotland, 2 clubs, Dunfermline and Hamilton, are already using synthetic turf. The pitches are very different to the ones used in England during the 1980s, but the controversy is just as strong.
It looks like grass. The makers claim it plays like grass, but it isn't grass. Hamilton Academicals have used the latest technology to install an artificial pitch that even UEFA agree is good enough to host football at the very highest level.
This is the old-style synthetic grass used a lot in the 1970s and 80s. You can see it's very, very abrasive, so players falling on this would find themselves with turf burn. And because it was so hard, the ball wouldn't react on it properly, and boots, football boots, would merely sit on top of this. The studs wouldn't get any grip, so footwear had to change. Basically, the game of football had to change. But a development moving on from this was new generation grass, which you can see is much longer, much softer to the touch, a nice waxy feel to it. And this is much more comfortable for players to play on.
And this is it, the surface that could change football. It cost Hamilton about £400,000 to install and should last them about 10 years.
Here's Sir Alex Ferguson. When the players emerge from the tunnel for an FA Cup final, they've always known that waiting for them are not only adoring fans, but a freshly mown grass pitch. It's almost impossible to imagine one of sport's most famous trophies being won on artificial turf. The groundsman for last year's FA Cup final was David Saltman. He's so concerned about the threat that grass pitches are facing that he's urging the game to unite to protect its heritage.
Players are comfortable playing on it, they're comfortable making challenges. Perhaps on a synthetic surface they're not so comfortable making those sort of challenges for fear of burning themselves. They tend to hold back, and I think we'll see an artificial game. And competitions like the FA Cup, I don't think we'll see giant killing acts anymore. I think if everybody plays on a standardised synthetic surface, then those giant killing acts of yesteryear will be gone.
Our toes point right to the ground.
Financially, for a club like Hamilton, a synthetic surface makes sense. The young and their heroes can practice together. What football's decision-makers must decide is if this represents the game's future or is simply short-term commercialism. James Pearce, BBC News.
One of the Oscar nominees for Best Foreign Language Film is a South African offering called Yesterday. It's the story of a woman's experience of AIDS and is the first full-length film in the Zulu language. As Alistair Leithhead reports, it marks the emergence of South Africa on the international film circuit.
In the foreboding landscape of rural South Africa, a visit to the Sangoma, or traditional healer, for the lead character Yesterday. The language is Zulu, a first for a feature film. The subject is HIV/AIDS and how it affects a poor rural woman who loses her husband to the virus and watches herself dying. Lileti Khumalo was the lead actress. She's now working on a South African soap opera.
The simplicity of the story, the way it has been done, I think it attracted a lot of attention, you know. This is huge for South Africa, you know. It's going to attract a lot of directors, producers, and it's going to bring a lot of work for us actors in South Africa.
The country's had a successful film industry for some time.
Okay, and action?
But it's either been for TV or as a service industry for the big Hollywood movies and advertisers. That's changing.
We're 10 years into the new South Africa, so very slowly but surely we're finding our identity. For the first time, I was allowed to just explore a single character and what her relationship was to what happens to her and her environment, where we're not worried about doing the right thing or saying the right thing or representing, you know. It's just movies about people.
Filming the latest big production. The cast and extras are all from the township for The Mysteries, a film based on the New Testament and set in 1970s apartheid South Africa. It's a follow-up to Carmen in Khayelitsha, another successful feature film in the local Xhosa language, which recently won the top award at the Berlin Film Festival. And just down the road from Khayelitsha Township, a site is being cleared for a new film studio. The developers boast it'll have the biggest soundproof stage in the world and the most space for set building. The fact that such a huge studio is going to be opening here just next year suggests how fast the industry is moving. And it's not just for the big Hollywood production companies either. There'll be a training and development centre for South African filmmakers to try and spur them on to even greater things. Alistair Leithhead, BBC News, Cape Town.
Now, with his production of the weather, John Hammond.
Thank you very much, Peter. I'll be producing some cold weather again over the next 24 hours, colder than it is now, because at the moment, although it's chilly, most of what is falling out of the sky is rain. Rather cloudy, grim picture across much of England and Wales. Some patchy rain you'll notice here drifting into central and eastern areas. Best of the brightness out west. Lurking out in the North Sea is substantially colder air again. It's heading in our direction. It's coming all the way from the Arctic through Scandinavia. You can see the deep blues here, some thoroughly cold air, and it's drifting in our direction. Just watch how those arrows turn bluer and bluer overnight. A bitter wind setting in across the southeast as we go through the latter part of the night, and that will eventually be feeding in some sleet and snow showers again, particularly funneling through the Thames estuary into parts of Kent and down across parts of East Anglia through into the Midlands as well as we go towards tomorrow morning. Northeastern parts of England prone as well from a dusting of snow. No great amounts, but could be a bit of a nuisance. Some icy roads around after today's rain and sleet as well. Cold night everywhere. Eventually temperatures at or below freezing in most places. Now a chilly day tomorrow across many eastern areas. A real bite to that wind across southeastern parts. There'll be a lot of cloud around and further sleet and snow flurries feeding in across eastern parts of England through into parts of the Midlands. Best of the sunshine, as you can see, out west. In fact, it'll be a fine day for Western Scotland, much of Northern Ireland, West Wales, the southwest of England. Not much changing through the afternoon. I think those wintry showers across the southeast will begin to fade away, but by far the best of the brightness again will be out west, which is pretty good news, I think, for Cardiff, the Millennium Stadium, of course, where the League Cup final takes place. Through the afternoon, Liverpool taking on Chelsea. Should be bright and cold. You can catch the action on 5 Live. And of course, we've got the Six Nations contest between Ireland and England in Dublin. Again, the risk of a wintry shower, but it should be fine with some sunshine. You can see that on BBC One. A cold, cold day across many southern and eastern parts of England. Noticeably colder than today. Temperatures in some places struggling to get above freezing. Cold enhanced by that brisk wind. Up towards the northwest, a little bit milder. 4s and 5s, and the winds won't be strong here. Now, overnight tomorrow night, we will see a very sharp frost developing several degrees below freezing. Then we've got a problem because we're going to see another area of rain moving down from the north and some snow, particularly as it hits the cold air moving down across England and Wales. A period of snow before it turns back to rain, but not for long because cold air will chase the mild air away, and that rain will eventually turn back to snow again.
This is no ordinary match. Under the surface of a Celtic v Rangers game runs a seam of religious hatred which can lead to violence away from the ground. The Scottish Parliament have promised a crackdown on sectarianism, but is it working? Panorama exposes Scotland's secret shame tomorrow at 10:15 on BBC One.
Within the last few minutes,
We understand that there has been a large explosion in Beirut.
Some breaking news here on BBC News 24. Prince of Wales is to marry Camilla Parker Bowles.
Ellen MacArthur has gone into the record books this evening.
2 news agencies are reporting the death of 17 people in a youth hostel in Spain. BBC News 24. Coming up in this half hour, it's Talking Movies, but first let's have a summary of the news. A man has been arrested in connection with the murder of the Belfast man Robert McCartney. Mr. McCartney was stabbed to death outside a Belfast pub 4 weeks ago. 3 IRA members were suspended over suspected involvement in the killing. Mr. McCartney's family have appealed to anyone involved in the events surrounding his death to hand themselves in. This afternoon, the family said they will not be able to grieve until Robert's killers had been brought to justice.
It is, however, only when all those involved, example, those IRA members and others, regardless of how small a part they played in the murder and subsequent clean-up operation, have handed themselves in and are charged, tried and convicted by the courts, will we, as a family, be able to bring closure to this horrific ordeal and begin to grieve for Robert.
The Middle East peace process is under renewed pressure after a suicide bomber blew himself up outside a Tel Aviv nightclub. At least 4 people were killed and many more injured. The Israeli army arrested 5 people this morning during an incursion into a village on the West Bank. Palestinian security forces have also arrested 2 men. The Pope will play a part in the traditional Angelus blessing tomorrow, but is not expected to make an appearance. The Vatican says one of the Pope's aides will read his words and bless the crowd in St. Peter's Square on the Pope's behalf. The 84-year-old pontiff is now said to be breathing without help, but his doctors at Rome's Gemelli Hospital say he won't be able to speak for several days. A fresh statement about his condition is now expected on Monday. At least 4 people have been killed and 9 rescued from a fire that raged through a high-rise building in Taiwan. The fire apparently started on the 18th floor of the Golden Plaza Tower, a 25-story building housing shops and schools. The skyscraper is located near the railway station in the centre of the city. A number of people have been seen running away from the building holding bags on their heads to protect themselves from falling glass. The main British Tsunami Appeal Fund closes today, 2 months after the disaster which devastated Southeast Asia. Britain has donated an unprecedented £300 million to the appeal, coordinated by the Disasters Emergency Committee. The DEC says that now the initial relief effort is over, it will focus on a long-term programme to rebuild schools, hospitals and businesses in the region. The head of the British Army, General Sir Mike Jackson, has apologised to the Iraqi people following the jailing of 3 of his soldiers for abusing civilian prisoners. Lance Corporal Mark Cooley, pictured here with an Iraqi, was yesterday sentenced to 2 years at a court-martial in Germany. Corporal Daniel Kenyon was given 18 months and Lance Corporal Darren Larkin got 5 months for the offences at a camp in Basra in May 2003. More than 300 people are reported to have died in a district of western Afghanistan during the worst winter for decades. The US military has begun dropping emergency supplies over the district, which has been cut off by snow now for more than a month. More snow is predicted before the spring thaw brings the danger of flooding. Thieves in the Netherlands have stolen around £50 million worth of diamonds and other jewellery. They hijacked an armoured truck at Amsterdam's Schiphol airport from a secure cargo area. A spokesperson for the Dutch airline KLM said nobody was hurt, though some staff members were threatened. Last-minute preparations are being made in Los Angeles for Hollywood's biggest night of the year, the Oscars. This year's ceremony takes place tomorrow night. The organisers have introduced some changes to the format to try to speed things up, including fewer thanks and shorter speeches. Some hope. And don't forget, you can keep up to date with all the headlines, the weather and the sport through Going Interactive. Just press that red button and follow those on-screen instructions. But that's a summary of the news at 3:34 now on BBC News 24. With the Oscars in mind, it's time for Talking Movies.
Hello and welcome to the Academy's headquarters in Beverly Hills. I'm Tom Brooke. In today's programme, a special preview of the Oscars. A refashioned Oscar ceremony. What's in it for the British? Will Martin Scorsese finally win? Or will Dirty Harry deliver a knockout punch? All that and more in this special Oscars edition of Talking Movies.
Talking Movies. Talking Movies. Talking Movies.
There are signs of awards burnout, just too many accolades in the run-up to the Oscars. In fact, some pre-Oscar shows have posted quite low ratings. So Laura Metzger has been taking a look at the efforts the Academy has been making to make sure its show is fresh and original.
Over 3 hours of live TV, big-name stars, unpredictable moments. Few would argue producing the Academy Awards is a huge endeavor.
It's a show that's only going to happen once. That makes it bigger than an opening night of a show on Broadway or something like that, because you can always fix something if you're going to have another night and another night and another night and so on. This happens live only one time.
When you think about who you're pleasing all the 110 million some odd people or countries and that are out there that want all eyes on Hollywood for the biggest show in television, the Academy Awards.
The Oscars may be the biggest night in Hollywood, but these days that doesn't mean it's guaranteed a big audience. That's because since the year began, there's the perception that a week hasn't gone by without a televised awards ceremony.
This creates like this endless gauntlet of awards ceremonies, like one after another. You know, you have the SAG Awards, you have the BAFTAs on cable, you have the Golden Globes. This week after week, the Grammys too, you know, the music awards are also in February. So you just got another one of these things like every week for 6 weeks, which, you know, viewers are going to get a little burned out on that by the end. Even though the Oscars is the ultimate awards show, there is, you know, the possibility that people might just be like, you know, enough already.
The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King.
Combine this with the fact that this year there's no crowd-pleasing blockbuster like Lord of the Rings up for an Academy Award, and that means there's no built-in audience for the Oscars. But Academy Award organizers seem intent on reversing the low ratings trend. A key component to their plan is the choice of Chris Rock as this year's host.
The host for the Academy Awards, as we all know, should be a movie star, should be preferably a stand-up comic who's used to working a room, as was obviously Steve Martin and David Letterman, Billy Crystal, Bob Hope, Johnny Carson. And when you think of the person that best fills that bill for the new century, it's Chris Rock. He's funny, he's hip, you know, there's always an unexpected element to him, which I think the audience finds endearing, and he's very, very smart.
Look at this crowd. It's like the Million White Men March here today.
The 40-year-old comedian has been called edgy and outspoken. He says he was intrigued by the idea of hosting the show and bringing a new spin to it.
My reaction was to just take a meeting with Gil Cates, the producer, and see if they had, you know, if they wanted to update it a little bit. I don't want to sit here and go, I'm going to be edgy. That's always for other people to say. Hopefully people think I'm funny.
More recently, Rock created controversy by calling the Oscars idiotic and comparing the event to a fashion show. But some take the view that his comments could all be part of a subtle PR campaign to make the Oscars ceremony, with Rock as its host, more appealing to a young, hip audience that's taken a cynical view of the awards. And in addition to its new host, the Academy has announced changes to how they'll hand out awards.
Give me a choice.
While some will still receive their trophy the traditional way, walking to the stage when the winner's name is revealed, other nominees will be asked to appear on stage together when the winner is announced. And still other groups will be handed their awards in their seats. The producers say these changes are intended to streamline a ceremony that historically runs over 3 hours. But this may not please the nominees, who might either have to stand on stage after losing the Oscar, or if they win while sitting in their seat, they won't have their moment on stage in the spotlight. But ultimately, no matter what impact the new format or Chris Rock has on ratings, it's clear the Oscars and award shows in general aren't going anywhere, because they're TV events that make money, generate headlines, and usually bump up box office returns for the films involved.
Ever since the days of silent pictures, Hollywood has had a love affair with the British. And over the years, it's been fairly routine for the Brits to go home with some top Oscar trophies. Well, will this winning streak continue this year? These are the British actors in the running: Kate Winslet, Clive Owen, Sophie Okonedo, and Imelda Staunton. All very talented, but the consensus is that strong competition will deny them each a trophy. For most, the nomination alone is enough.
It's fantastic and fantastical as well that it's happened, and I'm delighted because I'm so proud of the work, as I'm sure, you know, all nominees are, of what they've done.
On Hollywood Boulevard, and possibly among some Oscar voters, it's pretty clear that